We have to talk about it. Yesterday was the last night of the DNC, and there were some clear themes throughout the convention. We're redefining what patriotism and freedom means. We're bringing back voters from across the political spectrum to the Democratic Party and reiterating how much work still needs to be done in order for Democrats to secure this election victory. So as I said, we'll talk more specifics about Kamala Harris's speech in a bit, but I want to get some overall thoughts on the DNC first. The joy was really in the room last night and all throughout the week. And that's something that kept coming up in people's speeches. And it's true, overnight, this election became a monumental and historic election. The speakers were generally incredible. Some of them I maybe would have cut from the program, but I'm not the one running that show. The energy was up to the point that the Republicans even seemed salty about it in their coverage of the event, kind of like, whenever a kid wasn't invited to the party, that's what they sounded like. One thing that did stand out to me was the focus on domestic issues here at home, which are important and potentially something that will resonate with traditional Republican voters, things like healthcare and housing, immigration, et cetera. Republicans are the ones who bought into the whole America First campaign, but the Harris approach to domestic issues feels less overtly isolationist as what Trump was trying to push. But something that I think Democratic voters understand better than Republican voters is that you can't really talk about domestic issues without acknowledging what the US is doing overseas and how our past and present actions impact people abroad as well as here at home. You can't talk about the domestic without talking about the foreign.
A storm is tearing up the digital media industry. Only our audience can save us in these difficult times. Help us reach our goal of 100,000 new members at tyt.com/team.
But the Democrats seemed reluctant, let's say, to damper the joyful spirit of the convention by talking about inconvenient truths like the ongoing plight of the Palestinians and the current administration's role in what they are experiencing. As I said, we'll talk more about Kamala's speech after this. But Jordan, what were your overall thoughts on the convention? I know you watched the entire thing. Who are your favorite speakers? Do you think the Democrats are in a better position now than they were last week?
I don't know if there's too much of a change from last week, but if you wanted to compare it to last month, certainly think about where we were at the beginning of the summer and definitely in the spring. It was doom, it was gloom. People were crossing their fingers, hoping that we didn't have the worst possible outcome. And then you look at the DNC this week, like you mentioned, a lot of people experienced joy. A lot of people were very positive and optimistic. And it became, how do we avoid losing, to how can we run up the score? They're talking about states being in play that haven't been in play in a few cycles now. They're potentially going to have a play in Florida. Who knows what that'll look like, but that wasn't even a factor in 2020 or 2016. So it is really interesting to see the shift that the Harris and Walz ticket brings in this party. Favorite speakers, it's hard to say. I mean, it's tough not to say Bernie just because he's the only one that spoke to a lot of issues that I prioritize and had a substantive policy speech. Unfortunately, he was followed by Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who bragged about being a billionaire, followed by the former American Express CEO for some reason. I'm not sure why he was there, if only to reassure donors, reassure party elites, hey, that speech you just heard from Bernie back to back, we've got the wealthies back. So I like that he tries. I'm not gonna knock him for trying to work within the system. I don't think that much of that will materialize. Overall, you mentioned it, I was distraught when I saw a Palestinian was denied a speaking slot. They released their speech in advance. They offered to have it vetted. It was deferential deferential to the Harris campaign and endorsed the Harris campaign in the speech. All they wanted to do was speak for themselves, talk about what it means to be a Palestinian in this moment, and ultimately why they think a Harris-Walz ticket would be better than Trump. And the DNC said no. That's an odd choice when you have a decent contingent of uncommitted delegates and you have a robust Arab American population, many of whom have ties to Palestine, being upset and considering sitting out. Do you want to win those voters, or do you think you're going to flip independents and maybe some Republicans who are off put by Trump? That's a risky gamble that I don't know I would want to take. Why not both? It can be both. So I think it was a total miscalculation on the Democratic Party's part.
Yeah, and I will say anecdotally within the Brown community, Brown circles, it is very disappointing because we have somebody up there who kind of looks like us, finally, for once, right? And we want to celebrate this moment. We want this to be a victory. We want to feel that energy just the way that everybody else is. But at the same time, we know that she really isn't talking about what's going on in Gaza with the Palestinians as much as we would like her to. We keep hearing the same line that, she and Joe are working tirelessly to get the hostages back and make sure that what's happening in Gaza comes to an end. But it's been 10 months. And I think it was Francesca who actually said on yesterday's show, every day counts, right? I mean, think about it. If a school is bombed one day and not the other, every day people are dying. That's an entire life. That's an entire family that's destroyed. Those are buildings, that's history that's being destroyed. And it's been 10 months of that. Every single day counts. And so I don't know what they're doing. They're working tirelessly, which I guess is good, but it would be nice to know what kind of work they're actually doing, what steps they're actually taking to mitigate some of the violence that's happening over there. And on top of that, we keep hearing that this administration is sending over more money and more weapons to Israel. And they keep reiterating Israel's right to defend itself. And it really is just a line at this point, right? We've been hearing that same line for the past 10 months, almost a year now. And words do very, very little. There was also a moment in Joe Biden's speech where he said, the protesters out there, they have a point, That, tell me if I'm reading this wrong, Jordan, but that to me felt a little condescending. It was almost like, oh, what do you know? Those people out there who are yelling, and they're not even yelling, right? A lot of it was a peaceful protest, but all those people out there, they actually have a point. It's funny because whenever you have these big, massive movements, large protests across the country, around the world, sometimes it doesn't really reach the people in positions of power the way that we think that they should, because, it actually kind of relates back to D.L. Hughley's speech also, because he said something about how he was saying all these things, but it took Kamala Harris putting her hand on his shoulder and saying, hey, do some research, before he actually stopped and, looked at everything he was saying and what the rhetoric was around a lot of the things he was saying. It shouldn't have to be so personalized, right? It shouldn't have to be that one person gets to that person who is in control, who is in power, who can actually do something and say, oh, maybe you should actually listen to what all these hundreds of thousands of millions of people are saying.
Yeah, so saying the protesters having a point and then not doing anything about that essentially means nothing. And I think you're right, it is insulting. So today we have a scoop from Akbar Ahmed at HuffPost, who said that Biden just appointed a new top Israel-Palestine official at the State Department, Mira Resnick, a major proponent of arms shipments to Israel throughout the Gaza war. Okay, do these people have a point or don't they? Because they're saying stop arming Israel, and in doing that, by arming Israel, you are fueling this suffering. You are fueling this carnage. You are directly responsible for it. Without those arms shipments, without US support, these people many of these people would still be alive. We're seeing horrific images out of Gaza. I don't know about you, I've developed like a trigger response. I can't handle it. No one should have to see a mutilated child by US weapons, by any weapons, but it feels even worse when we know we're responsible. Our taxpayer dollars are funding it. And you just see these horrific, barbaric scenes coming out of Gaza. And then the Democratic Party says, well, we see you, we hear you, we're gonna do nothing about it. It's just a total slap in the face. They aren't asking for a lot. And Netanyahu is standing in the way, and you refuse to do anything about it.
Yeah. And also, to that point, there is so much politicking that happens at these types of events, right? We know that it's all for show. We know that these speeches are pre-written. We know that it's not really the most authentic representation of any of these leaders or speakers who are up there on that stage. But at the same time, I will give Kamala Harris a tiny, tiny bit of credit, for at least acknowledging that what's happening to the Palestinians is devastating, is heartbreaking, because honestly, that is much than we've ever gotten from Joe Biden, right? But again, that is such a low bar. It's ridiculous that I even feel silly saying it, but it is such a low bar. Hopefully, what I would say is hopefully you have to understand that in politics, there are certain things that politicians, people in positions of power can or cannot say out loud, because the things that they do say have large repercussions around the world. And with things that are very, very delicate, certain situations, she needs to find a way to bridge that gap, because people are not going to vote for her based on her response to this, right? And also Joe Biden's response to it, because she is linked to that. She is intrinsically tied to everything Joe Biden does regarding Netanyahu and Gaza and Israel and all of that. So we're going to have to see what comes out after this convention. Now that the convention is over, now that all the fun stuff is out of the way, we had a lot of fun. We partied. We had Lil Jon out there. My mother is now a fan of Lil Jon. That's fun. But now we need to get into more of the policy. We need to hear really, what is she going to do? What is she going to say about it? And tangible things. We need to know what is actually going to be done. Stop giving us lines. Stop telling us you hear us. If you hear us, then do something about it, because it's a lot of us. It's a lot of people. And we want to be there to celebrate with you, Kamala. We want to be there for this moment. We want it to feel good. And unfortunately, it doesn't feel as good as it really could. Any last things before we move on, Jordan?
Yeah, I think they're in an impossible position. So we talked about how they're trying to win over moderates. They're trying to win over disillusioned Republicans. And there's also a challenge of her being a female candidate. We saw it with Hillary. They're in a unique situation and an unfair situation where they have to try to act tougher, stronger, harder than their male counterparts. You see, and you mentioned before we started, you see that in business as well. It's an unfair result of misogyny and patriarchy. On the other side, it is unnerving to hear her say things like, we're going to have the most lethal military in the world. Like that is chilling. I don't think it would play well for a soundbite, but I hope the result of the first female presidency would be somebody who's able to succeed diplomatically in ways that men could not. You have men gleefully waging wars around the world for centuries. Chart a new course, show that this is the more skilled, strong course. That line last night really did not sit well with me. And I think it is a result of just a bunch of different factors feeding into her being potentially someone who breaks the glass ceiling.
Yeah, she really has a lot of things that she's trying to juggle, a lot of ideologies that she's trying to marry into one. And of course, there is the fact that she is going to be the first female president that we've ever seen in this country. And that's a change, right? That's a change that a lot of people have wanted to see, for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. Whenever women get into positions of power, a lot of times they feel like they have to emulate what the man has been doing and what the man does. But really, you don't have to, right? If you come to the table with a different set of strengths, then use those strengths, right? You don't have to try to be someone else, because that's going to be your downfall. That's going to be your weakness. That's not what you're good at doing. You're not good at being this warmonger. So don't do it. Try something else. There are other ways to achieve ends to things. And I think we forget that. But of course, we do have to mention, or really we kind of just want to mention because it's fun, that the DNC has beat the RNC in the ratings war, which I'm sure is going to upset the already upset Donald Trump. We don't have the numbers yet for Kamala's speech last night, but more people tuned into the DNC compared to the RNC each night. Jordan, ratings and polls, we know, only ever tell part of the story. But do you think that this is a positive sign as far as engagement in this election?
Could be. I think also the way that they structured the program made it more appealing to a general audience. I also watched all of the RNC, and it was just a lot of fear baiting and scaremongering, and also very redundant. A lot of people going up there and being like, an immigrant did this, an immigrant did that, a criminal did this, a criminal did that. And you have Democrats, by contrast, talking about things they want to do. The GOP framing was, this is what will happen. Shouldn't you? You should be scared. It's this. I mean, it's just what Fox News does. Everything is scary. You should never leave your house. On the fourth night, we don't have ratings yet. My theory, we saw the rumor float around yesterday that Beyonce was going to perform, and then Nothing happened. We heard rumors about a special guest and people speculated who that was. Nothing materialized. My theory now, in retrospect, is they planted that to get people to tune in, knowing nothing was going to happen, just so they can, so it wasn't just for ratings, but also just to get people to see the Harris speech.
I was wondering about that. That's so funny that you mentioned that, because they were teasing Beyonce, even Taylor Swift for a lot of it. And Taylor Swift, I remember tuning in and they were playing Shake It Off. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of a big deal, because you know that if Trump had played her song at the rally, that would have been a whole thing. We're going to talk about more of Taylor Swift v. Trump later in the show. But yeah, I think the way it was done, the way it was produced was very, very expertly done, very well done. It was very engaging. It was fun for people to watch. People over on Fox News are already mad about how fun it was, and that's always nice to see.
When you click the join button and become a tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?